Okay, welcome everyone. Course is CRD 305, and we'll be talking about a very important concept today, the concept of rural. The course is rural development, and we'll be talking about the concept of rural today, just to understand what rural really is and what development really is. Now, this is the first session for us in this semester, and as an introduction, it's important that every student understands what he or she is expected to do. Now, you understand before now that you're expected to carry out a lot of discussion sessions before your TMA opens, either TMA 1 or TMA 2 or TMA 3. Now, if you do not follow the um, facilitation session or read the course content or course materials and watch the instructional video, you will have no idea of what to do when the discussion forum opens and eventually when the TMA opens. So it's important you follow through this process. First, the school has arranged it in such a way that every student should be able to interact through asynchronous method of teaching and the synchronous method of teaching. So synchronous where we have face-to-face meetings, and then asynchronous where we do not have face-to-face meetings, where you have to interact with the discussion session as well as do your assignments, in-course assignments, and all other things you do therein. So in the course of this, if you go to the course portal, this course page, you will see that there is a facilitation session plan there, something that looks like this. I believe you can see it, CRE 305, Rural Development. And once you see it, just scroll down, you will see what is expected to be covered each week. And it's expected that you read through so that when we facilitate, when we meet online like this, we have a whole lot to discuss, gray areas that you do not understand while you read the lecture materials concerning the content for that week. You bring them up and we'll discuss them. You can, while we facilitate, you can type them in the chat or send a direct message or put up your electronic hand and I'll ask you to speak and then you will speak and we'll clear those areas. So you see week 1, week 2, week 3, there are different things that are put in that plan for us to cover. It's going to be very exciting because apart from being an academic exercise, it's also an enlightening exercise because we are all living in either an urban area or a rural area. And if you live in such areas, understanding the dynamics of that area is very, very important. Now, let's start teaching. Let's just present an introduction to this course. Let me share the course material that I'm supposed to use today. Like I said earlier, we're going to be talking about um, the concept rural development. All right. If I have not told you my name is Dr. Joseph Chukwudi Okonkwo, and I will be facilitating this particular course, rural development, for this semester. So, as a way of introduction, we're going to be talking about the concept of rural today. We'll try to understand what it really stands for, what it means, the ramifications around that concept, rural. All right, we'll discuss it. We'll talk about the various demographical criteria and various concepts to distinguish rural areas from urban areas. We'll also discuss importance of the rural society, the function of the rural society, social changes in rural society, contemporary rural urban comparisons. We'll be raising up some key issues in this area. We'll be talking about them briefly. Now, we're not supposed to be talking so intensely, that is me particularly talking so intensely in this facilitation section. The expectation is that every student will be here. I will raise the topic. You will say what you know. I will tell you what I know. This interaction is going to be very rich and you will not forget it. That is the essence of facilitation, not just a teacher teaching, and all that. There's a time where I will have to explain some concepts, relate some real life experiences, which I have going through this facilitation session for several years now. And then that will help you to understand. Also, we delve into the concept of development. What does it really mean? We'll talk about the dimensions of development and steps to bring in about development. So, firstly, one has to understand the concept of rural. What does it really mean? Rural is a modern concept. When we say modern, doesn't really mean that it's contemporary about today. No, it's modern in the context of time, because we have several things that have happened in pre-modern times, really far back. But historically, it's more recent that people started grasping the concept of rural and then just opposing it with the concept of urban. So ruralness did not just become an issue until sometime or something different developed, which was referred to as urban. That is when people started seeing that society were becoming more advanced, more developmental indices were seen in them, more modern facilities were found in them, more modern houses were found in them, more modern roads were found in them. Then I say, okay, this society is like updated than this one. And that brought into bear the fact that this one is a more modern society, this is a rural society, this is a more urban society, this is a rural society. So it is the advancement in our existence as human beings in recent times that introduced this concept called rural. Of course, a plurality of rural conditions have existed through history. Of course, they have been existing, but it didn't really become a social or cultural problem until modern times, where the distinction between societies became very, very obvious. So ruralness can be approached from a range of perspectives and can mean many things. Also, rural conditions and rural communities vary, and they are different from each other. So recent research has found that some characteristics once advanced, all right, once advanced as attributes of rural society may also be found in cities or urban societies. Close personal primary group relationships are one example. The term rural refers empirically to populations living in rural areas of low density and to small settlements. There are wide variations in the cutting points used operationally to distinguish a rural society from an urban society. There's even less agreement on the qualitative attributes that distinguishes a rural environment from an urban community or society. So the concept of rural has been defined in terms of one or more empirical attributes as a constructed type with qualitative attributes, and by the two in combination, the rural society has been described. Now, the methodological and theoretical problems in defining the concept rural are similar to those in the definition of urban and in the use of the constructed types in general. However, rural society, like I've explained earlier, can be empirically be differentiated from urban society in terms of population of those living in there, the density of the population, the type of settlement, is it small or large, the variation of people living there, and so on and so forth. We'll raise them up, we'll raise this concept um, very soon so we can easily, clearly state what a rural society is, what an urban society is. So it is crucial when discussing rural issues to avoid maybe stereotyping and saying because this community has been described as rural for a very long time, it's still rural. No, it may have moved from rural to urban. So you should avoid that stereotyping at this point. Don't worry, you will know why I'm saying this. Rural thus has ambiguous meaning relative to social historical location of the concept. Beside the geographical nouns that refers to remote areas or isolated areas as being rural, various other perspectives can be dictated, like the social configuration of an area can actually be used to either distinguish whether this is urban or rural. The economic configuration of an area can either also be used. The cultural configuration of an area, the political configuration, and the demographic configuration could also be used to dictate if an area is urban or rural. Frequently, we encounter negative connotations to the concept rural conditions. For example, we say the rural society has a low uh, um, capital economic capital exploitation. For example, you say a rural area, those that have economic skills, powerful, real tangible skills are not paid. So economically, rural areas are less than urban areas. Rural areas don't have good roads. Rural areas don't have good schools. Rural areas don't have good hospitals. So it's like negative connotations most times is used to qualify the rural areas. For now, let's leave it there. I will tell you why, whether you should do that or not to do that in a short while. It is often described as inferior to urban areas. You notice that rural areas are often described that way. At best, sometimes fragile. They describe it as being fragile. All right. Now, the concept rural is crucial if sociological analysis is to result in valid generalization. In the past decade, increased attention has been given to considering the minimum and essential criteria of rural societies. Now, recent research has found that some characteristics once advanced as attributes of rural society may also be found in real urban society. There are three types of criteria generally we use to define a rural society. Let's name them. Now, the three types of criteria that generally are used to define rural societies are: one, the number of inhabitants there. Of course, those in the urban area are more, those in the rural areas are fewer. The ratio of inhabitants to open land. Those in the urban area, the people there, the ratio of people to land is quite minimal. But for those in the rural areas, you see one person, but the land is very massive. You see two persons, the land is very, so the ratio you can see is quite large. Now, number three, types of economic activities can be used to define rural or urban society. For example, rural areas are mostly agrarian, that is, they practice agriculture, they fish, they're into food production, they exploit raw materials from nature through primary productions, that's through the earth, getting things directly from the earth. One problem that one faces is that governments do not use the same statistical criteria for rural and urban population. For instance, in Japan, any cluster of fewer than 30,000 people is considered rural, a definition that would make almost all the Antarctica rural, Antarctica areas, there's a continent, Antarctica, make everywhere there rural. Of course, it's not rural because that area where they live makes them fewer in per place because of the geography, except a handful of large towns in such areas. So you see, this statistical criteria for defining rural or urban societies may not fly in all areas. Okay, now you go to a city like, even in Nigeria, you go to Lagos, the entire Lagos is urban. But I don't think there's any other state that the entire state is urban. You see it. Even areas that in Lagos is considered to be rural, those areas, when compared with areas that are considered to be urban in other areas, they are even more urban than they are. So you see, the criteria is not uniform when government tries to define this thing. So there are various democratical criteria and various concepts that distinguishes urban areas from rural areas. Let's try and identify some of them. They could be differentiated based on densely and sparsely populated areas. According to um, the statistics in Norway, it describes densely populated areas as settlements with more than 200 people. That's the Norway definition. And less than 50 meters between houses. An agglomeration larger than 200 is registered as an urban settlement. In North Norway, you find 8 urban settlements with more than 8,000 people. The largest is Tromos with 60,000 people. So you see, that's how Norway defines its own. Now, in terms of demography, urban areas can be differentiated from rural areas, right? Now, one must consider the type of economic structures and level of technologies applied in the settlement, the cultural and educational structures that are applied in such settlement. Of course, we understand that economically the urban areas do better than the rural areas. And then the level of technology, when you consider it, you'll find out that the urban areas have more advanced technologies applied in their settlement than in the rural areas. Culturally, the rural areas have a lot of culturally dependent attitudes and perspectives than in the urban areas where things are really more liberal. Now, educationally, urban areas are more advanced than rural areas. Then, in terms of serving function and lifestyle, of course, the lifestyle of the rural persons are um, are quite closely knit, while in the urban areas, people don't really relate with each other that much. Now, settlements depend. These different settlements are depending on different things to power them. For the rural areas, they depend mostly on natural resources, while the urban areas do not do that, right? They are more industrial inclined. So industrial structures are set up in urban areas. Okay, now let's move on to the next. Now, absence of industry can also be a differentiating criteria. For rural areas, there's absence of industry, while in urban areas, there is industry. Medical institutions are more in urban areas than they are in rural areas. Research centers are an indication or indicators of rural settlements. And what are the educational opportunities offered within a settlement? Does it offer opportunity of higher education? If it does, it's mostly urban. Does it have colleges, universities, and all that? If there are more, it is urban. But if there are less, maybe just one, it is rural. These are the criteria that should inform whether a place is urban or rural. As a consequence of economic and educational structures, the composition and the demand for labor vary. Because if you have a lot of industry in a particular place, if economic activity is more in a particular place, the demand for labor in such areas will vary, and the price placed on labor will also be higher. So for rural areas where the demand economically is not high, the demand for educational structure is not that high, industry is not that high, the price for labor will be reduced. While urban areas, we have a higher price for the labor that they put in. That's why you see once one gets an education, it migrates from the rural area to the urban area to earn better. Now, rural societies were typically, with their strong adherence to farming and fishing, like we said, they are agrarian and marked with high regard for intimacy and tradition. So people hold family structure, how we relate with each other dear to their heart in rural areas than in urban areas. This is in contrast with urban areas, which are characterized by impersonal bureaucracies, rationalized specialization, and mechanization. All right. So now let us highlight some core characteristics, key characteristics of rural societies. Rural societies are characterized by one, relatively few people. Because we say relatively few people per space, compared to urban areas that are densely populated per space. Number two, in rural societies, they basically are depending on natural resources. Number three, rural societies are limited in terms of their educational opportunities after secondary school. Number four, rural societies are limited in terms of job demand and opportunities for skilled and educated labor. And then finally, in rural societies, there's the absence of urban commodities like cafes, restaurants, theaters, galleries, and so on and so forth. So you see, that's a summary of what characterizes a rural society. Now, sociologically, investigation of rural society may be classified into four broad categories. When we talk about this, it means that when you want to really investigate into a rural society, how do you investigate in terms of sociology? Sociologically, investigations are classified into four. One, studies using rurality as independent variable. Let me just dwell here a bit. When you carry out a research, some of you will be about going for your research very soon, maybe in your final year. There's something you will observe. You have to come up with a research topic, and you are called up to investigate that research. And now, for that topic to be researchable, the topic should contain two key variables, at least two key variables, one independent variable and one dependent variable. Of course, the combination and the way you construct it will tell us clearly the, uh, the what you are going out to investigate. So sociological investigation, when they try to study rural societies, one of the classification is they study it, rurality, and using rurality as an independent variable, meaning it is the variable that tries to make an impact on a dependent variable. It depends on the dependent variable that you choose in that study. That is one. Then number two, in the study, um, it's comparative studies of rural societies can be carried out in this investigation. Number three, studies for which rural society is the setting within which family systems, ecological systems, cultural systems, personality systems, and other phenomena are analyzed. And then the fourth category is studies of social changes within each of these previous three categories that we just highlighted. Now let's highlight some of the functions of rural society. Rural society has also functioned in many ways. The production of food and other raw materials is a basic function of rural society. Indeed, in modern societies, the survival of the urban sector is dependent upon the effective conduct of this function of production of food and other raw materials that power both industries and service industries. Now, historically, rural societies has also functioned as a supplier of people to society or to cities. The relative importance of the rural to urban migration is probably the greatest in societies that are undergoing modernization. The third distinguished function of rural society it is it is the custodianship of natural resources, meaning that it is in the rural society you find rural natural resources. You don't find it in urban societies. And the fourth function is that modern rural societies increasingly serve as residential functions for persons with urban centered sources of livelihood. What does it really mean? Some people work in Lagos, but they prefer to relax in Ibadan. They go down to Ibadan, not Ibadan town, but society communities around Ibadan that is very cool and residential. So the rural society serve as a place where they go and rest, then go back to the urban society to work. So it's a residential function they play. And finally, in times of societal crisis, there has been a tendency for rural society to perform a security function as represented by urban to rural or postponed rural to urban migration. Most of us that are from rural societies as our villages, the rural society serve as security. If you are chased from the urban area, if you are in trouble in urban area, you run back to the rural area where you go and seek kind of refuge. Now, what do we mean by social change in rural societies? Social changes. The trend towards modernization of traditionally rural societies, which has been on the way for well over a century, probably in North America, even in Africa and Nigeria in particular, has trended probably in Great Britain, as in UK, Western Europe, and so on, has accelerated and become more uh, pervasive during this 21st century or 20th century, as we were describing, especially since the World Wars ended, World War One, World War Two, and all that. Now, rural societies of the modern times are so interlinked with their natural or national systems and the international systems that they are so interlinked with these both national systems and international systems that the changes in their societal organizations are highly familiar in many respects. So you see a society that is rural in the north, similarly looking like a society in the west, similarly looking like a society in the east, in the south, and all that, because they are influenced by national systems, they are influenced by international systems. So traditional type of rural societies are generally moving towards the same type of linkages because of these links. The process by which a traditional, largely isolated and segmented rural society become a modern type rural society integrated with the national systems or national society is a special case of the more general process of societal change. So you see, because of the influence, for example, now you go to a rural area, you notice that that rural area has internet. And if it has internet, it means people there can interact with people in Saudi Arabia, international. So you see, and being closely linked with people outside the country, meaning that they can start adapting and adopting some of the characteristics they see and hear from outside the country or nationally. You can be in a very rural area now and start watching programs like national sports, all these celebrity shows they do on TV, and so on. So it triggers social changes in rural societies. These major changes have been expressed in such highly general terms as increased structural differentiation or specialization of social systems. More universality norms are adopted in the rural society because of these major changes. And the growth of a rational orientation has also been persistent. Some authors have posited. This discussion on social change will focus on the following selected factors, which have special significance for the rural society or for the rural social changes of the present century. The growth and application of technology and scientific knowledge is, is one of uh, the outfall, one of the things that these social changes is bringing. The increase in urbanization is one of the things the changes is bringing. The growth of the money and market economy is one of the social changes that this interaction interlinkages is bringing, and the increase in purposive innovation. These are some selected factors that have emanated from the link social changes brings in rural societies. Now, we also have reflecting, these social changes have made rural societies to reflect rationalities and a favorable attitude towards change. You know, some rural societies are very, very against changes. If you go to some societies now, those old rural societies, they abhor certain things because they feel that such act don't is not in consonance with their practices. For example, in some societies in those days, women are banned from wearing trousers. But today, women wear trousers and they're not being frowned at. Why? Because of social changes. Now, these factors may operate partly independently and partly in association, and may be in part, in some ways, secular in their effect. In large measures, they operate generally as external forces for change in rural societies and their social systems. The changes which these forces generate within rural communities in turn produce additional internal community changes within such rural societies. Now, there's a need for contemporary rural-urban comparison for us to compare what makes somewhere a place rural and what makes a place urban. Now, the pattern of higher fertility in rural than in urban areas is observed in practically all countries for which data are available. Although it seems generally to be least marked within the most traditional societies. The differentials have been persistent even in more modern nations. Now, one of the key contemporary comparison is fertility rate. Of course, like we have mentioned now, there are higher fertility in rural areas and in urban areas. In previous times, people have observed that why those in the rural areas are more fertile than those in the urban areas is because of their feeding pattern, lifestyle that they live, and so on and so forth. All right. But maybe the day we'll be more in class, we'll discuss this. Now, in 1960, the number of children ever born per 1,000 rural women aged 35 to 39 in the United States was more than one fifth larger than for the urban areas. So you see, in none of the 50 states was the urban fertility as high or average size of family as large as the rural society. So the rural areas had more families and higher fertility. Now, the combined effect of differential fertility and differential migration leaves the rural areas with a disproportionate burden of dependents, especially children, and a relatively shortage of persons in the productive adult years. Of course, because they are higher in fertility, they have more children. However, they have this disproportionate differentials because migration tend to take the able-bodied ones out of the rural areas and leave them with children and the elderly. These are some comparative factors comparing rural areas and urban areas. Now, what is the meaning of development? Development can be defined as a general improvement in economic, social, political conditions of the whole society in terms of reduction or elimination of poverty, inequality, injustice, insecurity, ecological imbalance, and unemployment within the context of a growing economy. So you see, that's a definition by Filani of development. We have generally defined development as entailing a shift, an upward shift at that, from one end to another and over a period of time. This is a positive development. Sometimes development can be negative depending on the situation, but this is not the kind of development that these courses are focusing on. Development goes beyond just increasing per capita and financial aspect of people living in an area. Now, when we say development and when we use per capita income, it's important to understand what we mean by that. Now, per capita income is like you say the population of a place is maybe 20,000, and we say everybody there earns a total of 200,000. So if you divide the population by what everyone earns, you get the average. That is the per capita income, right? So you divide 200 by 2,000 and you get maybe 10,000, I think. So you say the per capita of such a place is 10,000, right? So that's how it is calculated. Now, it includes changes in development, includes changes in institutional, social, and administrative structures, as well as social behaviors and attitude of people, including their customs and belief. It should be noted that development is a continuous process. Note, development is a continuous process. Development is a process. It is unending, it goes on and on. Now, what are the dimensions of development? According to Filani, development could focus on any of the following dimensions. One, social development, economic development, political development, cultural development, and religious development. All these developments are tied together, even though in theory, distinctions can be made. All the aspects focus at raising the people's standard of living. Now, from the definition we've gotten from development that we highlighted earlier, the following conclusions can be drawn or can be reached. From this development and concepts on perspectives of development, the following conclusions can be reached. Let's say one, development contributes to the well-being and comfort of the people. Two, development is a process and is continuous. Number three, it is quantitative, meaning it can be measured. That is, it increases per capita income. Number four, okay, that's number three. Number four, it is qualitative, meaning that it's not only when it is quantitative you can say development has occurred. It is qualitative, that is, it involves a total increase in the quality of lives people live in the area of education, health, equality, security, social comfort, and so on. Five, it is not just the availability of roads, story buildings, great industries, cars, planes, electricity, advancement here and there, and so on. It also includes all these availability. All if it also includes that if these are all available and the people do not have equal access to them, development may not have been seen to have happened. That we cannot really conclude that development has occurred because you can have all these and few people can access it, and then the majority have not been able to access it, so development has not really happened. Now, what is the steps in bringing about development? The first step in bringing about development is in carrying out informed or informal survey. That is fact finding. You try to identify. Uh, you try. You try to identify what is the major concern of the community. Number two, identification of small group of leaders or interest groups who can serve as initiating sects. It's important to understand why this is important. Now, to bring about development, the first thing you do is to carry out an informal survey. That is, you ask questions around. What do you want in your community? How do you really want it? What is your pressing need? These are informal things, because when you get formal like this, some people will not want to answer you. But informally, you just move around the community and fact, fact, fact find some of the things or identify community concerns. Then the second is to identify small group of leaders, interest groups who can help you to set the tone. Why? These people are community leaders as well as opinion leaders. And of course, what defines one as an opinion leader is that people believe in what the opinion leader says. So if you can get the opinion leader on your side to buy into your developmental ideas, you will end up bringing about development in that space. So another step in bringing about development is identification of immediate community problems. Probably they're having erosion issues, they're having educational issues. Identify it. Number four, sharing of problems identified with the community leaders for legitimation. You've carried out an informal survey. You've talked to group leaders, interest groups, opinion leaders. You've identified immediate community problems. Take these findings to the community leaders and share it with them. Tell them we've observed that your people are having educational problems. You're having ecological issues. You're having erosion problems and security issues. Take that thing there. And then the fifth step is definition of problems and definition of needs. At this point, you try to find out how these problems can be diffused and identify or define the needs therein. And then the next is securing citizens' commitment to act and identify or identification of needed resources. That is, you get the people to identify with what you have found out. Let them get committed to wanting to fix it. Let them be hungry that these problems should be fixed. This development should come. And then identify natural resources or needed resources that may be used to fix it, whether internally or externally, but start internally. Then the next step is to appraise the available internal resources, and then you call for invitation for external aids where you need it. The next step is formulation of a detailed plan of action, including a timetable. Of course, if you don't have a time frame for execution, you will be firing blank. Every time will be your time, and that will not be right. So formulate a detailed plan of action, including a timetable of when to start, what to do next, when to finish. The next step is carry out the actions and evaluating the entire process and the result. Whenever you have carried out any action, then always go for evaluation. Evaluate your work. Have I met my set out objectives? Have I met set out objectives so that I'll be sure the result I hoped to achieve has been achieved? And then finally, identification of derived problem or needs and planning for the continuation of the process. And development can be entrenched in such a place. By derived problems or need, here the author meant that those unanticipated effects of the changes after implementation. That is, you plan to bring about educational issues and that triggered other unanticipated effects, probably causing women to quarrel, protest, that they were not taken into consideration in that process. So those were not anticipated, but it was part of a process. Now, in summary, today we have discussed rural societies, we defined it and what differentiates it from urban, its importance and functions. We've also tried to talk about the meaning of development, the dimensions of development, and the steps involved in bringing about development. So in the next unit, we'll be talking about the meaning of rural development as a concept, and we'll be discussing that in more details. All right, I hope to see more of you in our next session. So we concluded today that rural society, we concluded by discussing the concept of rural, the types, the three types of criteria generally we use in defining rural societies. We highlighted various demographical criteria and various concepts of this that distinguishes rural from urban. As a concise development, development is necessary and conscious, and it's a continuous process. And we raise that in today's session. And we raise the fact that development involves some elements and steps which should be carefully followed by the stakeholders. Many areas have remained underdeveloped as a result of the inability of the people to understand and effect development in all its dimensions. And we mentioned the different dimensions of development. That was all we did today. I'm looking forward to having you send me questions concerning these few things we've just used to set the pace for today's for this session's course on rural development. Now, take this in-course assignment, try to read the lecture materials and see if you can uh, attempt these questions. If you can do that, that would be really, really nice. Send me some feedbacks and I'll be glad to respond to you. Okay, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. And I hope to see you in my next class. I hope to see you in my next time. Now, do well to subscribe. Do well to subscribe to this session